Jake Morrison floated through the docking tube and felt his stomach drop. The space station in front of him was bigger than any city he had ever seen. Metal and crystal twisted together in patterns that hurt his eyes to follow. Lights blinked, in colors that had no names. This was Nexus 7, where humanity would take its first test. To join the galaxy. Behind Jake came the other 3 humans chosen for this mission. Lisa Park moved like a cat, her pilot training showing in every step. Dan Kim carried a toolbox, even though he was told he would not need it. Amy Foster checked her medical scanner for the 5th time in 10 minutes. They were the first humans to leave Earth and meet alien life. The docking bay doors opened with a sound like breaking glass. A being made of living crystal walked toward them. It had no face that Jake could see, but somehow he knew it was looking at him. The crystal creature was tall and thin, with light moving through its body like trapped lightning. "Welcome, humans," the being said, without moving what might have been a mouth. Its voice came from everywhere at once. "I am Zeph9, your integration assessment instructor. You will call me instructor. I will teach you how to behave properly in galactic society." Jake looked at the others. Lisa raised one eyebrow. Dan was already studying the walls and ceiling. Amy was scanning Zeph9 with her medical device, which beeped quietly. "Please follow me," Zeph9 continued. "Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless asked. Do not move faster than I move. These are basic safety rules that all species must follow." They walked through halls that seemed to change shape as they moved. Other aliens walked past them. Some looked like giant insects with too many arms. Others floated like jellyfish filled with stars. A few looked almost human, but with skin like tree bark and eyes that glowed softly. "The integration assessment has 3 parts, Zeph9 explained as they walked. "First, we test your basic coordination and response patterns. Second, we test your emergency protocols. Third, we test your combat capabilities. Every species must pass all 3 parts to join the Galactic Union." They entered a huge room filled with strange obstacles. There were platforms at different heights, moving walls, and spinning barriers. At one end of the room, a group of the insect-like aliens was moving through the course. They moved with perfect timing, each step planned and measured. When they reached a gap, they jumped exactly the right distance. When a wall moved toward them, they stepped aside at precisely the right moment. "These are Graxons," Zeph9 said. "Watch how they complete the course correctly." The Graxons finished the obstacle course in exactly 12 minutes and 37 seconds. Each one took the same path and made the same movements. It was like watching the same person complete the course 5 times. Next came a group of floating aliens that looked like living silk scarves. They moved through the obstacles like water flowing around rocks. When they needed to go under something, they compressed their bodies. When they needed to go over something, they stretched tall and thin. They also finished in exactly 12 minutes and 37 seconds. "Those are Velethi," Zeph9 explained. "Notice how they also follow the correct pattern. Every species learns the proper way to navigate obstacles. There is always one best path and one correct timing." Jake watched the aliens complete their perfect runs and felt something twist in his stomach. It was too clean, too planned. Where he came from, obstacles were meant to be overcome, not danced around with predetermined steps. "Now it is your turn," Zeph9 announced. "Human Jake Morrison will go first. Follow the established pattern. Take the correct path. Use the proper timing." Jake stepped up to the starting line and looked at the course ahead. He could see the path the other aliens had taken. It curved around obstacles, avoided the moving parts, and used only the stable platforms. It was safe and predictable and made him want to scream. A buzzer sounded and Jake ran forward. But instead, Of following the careful path around the first barrier, he dropped and rolled underneath it. Behind him, he heard Zeph9 make a sound like crystal cracking. Jake did not stop. When he reached a gap that the others had jumped carefully, he leaped without slowing down and caught the edge of the far platform with his hands. Pulling himself up, a moving wall swung toward him. The proper response was to wait for it to pass, then step through the gap. Instead, Jake pushed off from it as it moved, using its momentum to launch himself toward the next obstacle. He landed hard and rolled, coming up running. Behind him, Jake could hear more sounds from Zeph9. They sounded alarmed. He could also hear the other humans cheering him on. Even though they had been told not to speak, Jake reached the end of the course in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. He was breathing hard, but grinning. That had been fun in a way that the careful alien approach could never be. "What did you just do?" Zeph9 demanded, its crystal body flashing bright red. "That was not the correct pattern. You deviated from established protocol. You could have been damaged." "I finished the course," Jake said, still catching his breath. "Isn't that the point?" "No," Zeph9 replied, its voice rising to a painful pitch. "The point is to follow the correct procedure. Every species follows the same path. It is the only safe way." Lisa went next. She also ignored the proper path, choosing instead to use her pilot training to navigate the obstacles like they were asteroids in space. She finished in 6 minutes and 58 seconds. Dan treated the course like an engineering problem to be solved. He found handholds and supports that the other aliens had not used. He finished in 7 minutes flat. Amy moved through the obstacles like she was navigating an emergency room during a crisis. She helped a Graxon student who had frozen up during their practice run, even though that was not part of the test. She finished in 8 minutes, but only because she had stopped to help Dot by the time all 4 humans had completed the course. Zeph9 was flashing colors that hurt to look at. Other alien instructors had gathered to watch. They whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music and mathematics. "This is unprecedented," Zeph9 announced to the group. "In 312 years of conducting integration assessments, no species has ever deviated from the established patterns. These humans have achieved completion times that should not be possible using unauthorized methods." Jake looked at his team. They all seemed as confused as he felt. They had just done what came naturally. What was the big deal about that? "We will pause the assessment," Zeph9 declared. "I must consult with the senior instructors about these anomalies. Wait here. Do not touch anything." As Zeph9 floated away, Jake heard Lisa whisper, "Did we just fail the test by doing too well?" Dan was already examining the nearest wall panel with obvious interest. Amy was checking on the Graxon students she had helped earlier. Jake stood in the middle of the obstacle course and wondered what they had gotten themselves into. 3 hours later, Zeph9 returned with 2 other crystal beings. Their bodies pulsed with nervous energy that made the air around them hum. Jake and his team had spent the waiting time talking to the other alien students. The Graxons spoke in careful, measured sentences. The Velathi communicated through color changes in their translucent bodies. Everyone seemed confused about what the humans had done wrong. "We will continue with emergency response protocols," Zeph9 announced. Its voice carried a tension that had not been there before. "This test measures your ability to respond correctly to crisis situations. You will enter the simulation chamber and follow established emergency procedures." The chamber they entered looked like the inside of a spaceship. Control panels lined the walls, blinking with lights and patterns Jake did not recognize. There were several levels connected by ladders and walkways. Everything felt solid and real, though Jake suspected it was all some kind of advanced hologram. "Observe the correct procedure," instructed the second crystal being, who had introduced itself as Vex Prime. When the emergency begins, you will see designated escape routes marked with flashing blue lights. Follow these routes to the designated safe zones marked in green. Do not deviate from the marked paths. Do not attempt to help others unless specifically trained for that role. Do not operate equipment unless authorized to do so. The Graxon students went first. When alarms began sounding and fake debris started falling from the ceiling, they moved like they were following a map. Blue lights showed them exactly where to go. They walked in single file along the designated routes, avoiding the falling objects and the sparking control panels. When they reached the green safe zones, they stood quietly and waited. 3 of the slower Graxons got hit by debris, but they continued following the proper procedure even while injured. The simulation ended with most of them safe in the designated areas. Acceptable performance, Vex Prime announced. Casualty rate of 4% falls within normal parameters. The Graxons followed all proper emergency protocols. The Velathi students performed almost identically. They flowed along the blue-lit paths like water, reforming around obstacles. When debris fell toward them, they compressed to avoid it rather than change course. 2 Velathi got trapped under a fallen beam, but they waited for designated rescue personnel rather than attempting to free themselves. Their casualty rate was 3%. Also acceptable, Vex Prime confirmed. The Velathi demonstrate proper emergency discipline. Then it was the humans' turn. Jake, Lisa, Dan, and Amy entered the simulation chamber as alarms immediately began wailing. Fake smoke filled the air and debris started raining down from above. Blue lights flashed, showing the path to safety. Jake looked at the blue-lit route and felt his military training kick in. The path led around the outside of the chamber, avoiding the worst of the falling debris, but taking much longer than necessary. Meanwhile, he could see several alien students from previous runs struggling in the middle of the room, apparently left behind by the evacuation procedure. Without thinking, Jake ignored the blue lights and ran toward the center of the chamber. A large piece of metal was about to fall on a Graxon who was moving too slowly. Jake tackled the alien, rolling both of them out of the way just as the debris crashed down where the Graxon had been standing. Wrong direction, the Graxon said, sounding confused. The safe zone is that way. Not without you, Jake replied, helping the alien to its feet. Across the chamber, Lisa had also abandoned the designated escape route. She was not heading for the green safe zone at all. Instead, she was moving toward a control panel that was sparking dangerously. Other aliens were giving it a wide berth, following their training to avoid malfunctioning equipment. Lisa grabbed the panel and started working on it with tools from her belt. "You are not authorized to operate that equipment," a Velathi student called out as it flowed past her. "It controls the artificial gravity," Lisa called back, her hands flying over the controls. "If it fails completely, everyone will start floating, and the debris will become 10 times more dangerous." Meanwhile, Dan had found a group of alien students trapped behind a collapsed walkway. The proper procedure was to wait for authorized rescue teams to clear the obstruction. Dan took one look at the trapped aliens and started moving chunks of debris with his bare hands. When that proved too slow, he pulled out tools from his kit and began cutting through the twisted metal. "This is not your assigned role," one of the trapped Graxons protested. "You should proceed to the safe zone." "The safe zone can wait," Dan grunted, hauling aside another piece of wreckage. "You cannot." Amy had discovered something even more disturbing. Several alien students from earlier simulations were lying on the floor, apparently injured but ignored by everyone else. The emergency protocol seemed to be that only designated medical personnel could provide treatment. Amy knelt beside a wounded Velathi and began examining its injuries. "You lack proper medical authorization for this facility," the Velathi protested weakly. You must wait for designated healers. I am a doctor, Amy said firmly, pulling out her medical scanner. That is all the authorization I need. The simulation was supposed to last 15 minutes. The humans had it resolved in 6. Jake had evacuated not just himself, but 8 other students who had been left behind by the standard procedure. Lisa had prevented a gravity failure that would have turned the falling debris into a deadly storm of floating projectiles. Don had freed 12 trapped students and reinforced 2 critical structural supports. Amy had treated 15 injured aliens, including several who had been hurt in previous simulations and left to wait for proper medical attention. When the alarms finally stopped, the chamber fell silent except for the sound of alien students chattering in confused voices. Zeph 9 and Vex Prime floated in the observation area, their crystal bodies flashing colors that Jake had not seen before. 0 casualties, Vex Prime announced, its voice barely above a whisper. Evacuation completed in 6 minutes and 12 seconds. All damaged systems repaired or stabilized. All injured personnel treated on site. A 3rd crystal being materialized beside them. This one was larger than the others, with deeper colors flowing through its body. I am Keth 7, Chief Assessment Officer. What exactly happened in this simulation? The humans ignored all established protocols, Zeph 9 reported, its voice tight with stress. They deviated from designated escape routes. They operated unauthorized equipment. They assumed roles they were not assigned. They provided aid outside their designated specializations. And yet they achieved a perfect outcome, Keth 7 observed. No casualties, record completion time, and they even improved the situation for students from previous simulations. How is this possible? Jake stepped forward. We just did what needed to be done. Is not that the point of emergency training? No, Keth 7 replied, its voice filled with something like shock. The point of emergency training is to ensure predictable, manageable responses to crisis situations. Individual initiative leads to chaos. Improvisation leads to additional casualties. This is why we have protocols. But everyone got out safe, Lisa pointed out, and faster than your protocols would have managed. That is not the issue, Vex Prime interjected. The issue is that your responses cannot be predicted or controlled. If we cannot predict how you will behave in a crisis, how can we integrate you safely into galactic society? Amy looked up from a Graxon student she was still treating. Maybe. The question is not how you can integrate us safely, but how we can help make your emergency procedures actually work for everyone. The silence that followed was longer and more uncomfortable than any Jake had experienced. Finally, Keth 7 spoke. We will postpone the combat assessment, pending further evaluation. These results require analysis by the Senior Council. As the aliens filed out of the chamber, Jake heard Dan whisper, I think we just broke their entire system by doing it better. The thought should have been satisfying. Instead, Jake felt a growing worry about what would happen when beings who valued predictability, above all else, decided what to do with humans who could not be predicted. 2 days passed before Keth 7 returned with a decision. Jake and his team spent the time in guest quarters that felt more like a very comfortable prison. They could not leave their assigned area, though alien students and instructors came by, constantly to stare at them through the transparent walls. The humans had become some kind of exhibit. We have decided to proceed with the combat assessment, Keth 7 announced when it finally appeared. However, we will be monitoring this test more carefully than any in our history. Your species displays tactical thinking that our analysis cannot predict. Tactical thinking? Lisa asked. We just used common sense. There is no such thing as common sense, Keth 7 replied. There are only learned responses and programmed behaviors. What you call common sense appears to be some form of real-time adaptation that should not be possible in any sapient species. They were led to a combat training facility that looked like a cross between a gym and a battlefield. Holographic projectors lined the walls and ceiling. The floor was covered with objects that could be used as weapons or obstacles. Jake recognized some things that looked like swords and clubs, but there were also items he could not identify. Combat assessment measures your ability to respond to threats according to established defensive patterns, explained a new instructor, a being that looked like a walking tree made of metal. Each species has specific combat protocols based on their physical capabilities and cultural background. You will face standardized opponents designed to test these protocols. The alien students demonstrated first. A group of Graxons entered the combat area and faced holographic opponents that attacked with predictable patterns. The Graxons responded with moves that looked like a deadly dance. Each attack was met with a specific counter. Each counter led to a predetermined follow-up. The combat flowed like a complex equation where every variable had a known solution. Observe how the Graxons employ Battle Formation 7 against Threat Pattern Delta, the tree instructor noted. Each response is calculated for maximum efficiency with minimum risk. The Velathi students performed next. Their combat style was completely different from the Graxons, but equally predictable. They flowed around attacks like liquid, always returning to specific positions after each defensive move. When they counterattacked, they used the same combinations in the same sequences. The Velathi demonstrate Fluid Combat Method 3, the instructor continued. Note how each defensive position leads logically to the next predetermined response. Jake watched the demonstrations and felt his stomach tighten. These were not fighters. These were beings performing combat choreography. There was no creativity, no adaptation, no real fighting instinct. It was like watching robots programmed to look dangerous. Human Jake Morrison will now demonstrate his species' combat protocols, Keth 7 announced. The simulation will begin with Threat Pattern Alpha and escalate based on performance. Jake stepped into the combat area and immediately felt the difference. The holographic opponents that materialized around him moved with the same predictable patterns he had observed. But something about facing them directly made his body tense with readiness. These were not real enemies, but his training and instincts did not care about that distinction. The first holographic attacker came at him with an overhead strike that telegraphed itself from 3 steps away. According to what Jake had observed, he should block the attack with a specific defensive position, then counter with a predetermined response. Instead, Jake stepped inside the attack, grabbed the hologram's arm, and used its own momentum to throw it into 2 other attackers approaching. From his flanks, the simulation paused. The remaining holographic opponents froze in place while the system apparently tried to process what had just happened. That was not Threat Pattern Alpha Response 1, the tree instructor announced, sounding confused. Please repeat the sequence, using correct protocol. I neutralized the threats, Jake replied. Is not that the point? The point is to demonstrate proper combat response patterns, Keth 7 interjected. Please follow established procedure. The simulation restarted. This time, more holographic opponents appeared, moving in formation beta. Jake tried to follow the defensive patterns he had observed, but it felt wrong. When an enemy attacked high, every instinct told him to go low and attack the legs. When they came in a group, his training screamed at him to separate them and take them one at a time. Jake lasted about 30 seconds, trying to fight the alien way before his survival instincts took over completely. He stopped trying to meet attacks with proper blocks and started using everything in the environment as a weapon. He grabbed a metal rod and used it to trip 2 opponents, then threw it at a third. When a holographic enemy tried to grapple him, Jake bit its arm and stomped on its foot before throwing it into a wall. The simulation ended abruptly when Jake won a scenario that was supposed to test his defensive capabilities, not his ability. to completely destroy all opponents. This is highly irregular, the tree instructor muttered, reviewing data streams that flowed across its bark-like skin. The human employed 17 different combat techniques that do not appear in any galactic database. How did you learn the Forbidden's pressure point strike of Vega Prime? I do not know what that is, Jake said honestly. I just tried to stop him from grabbing me. Lisa went next. Her combat session lasted even shorter than Jake's because she treated the exercise like a flight simulation. She moved through 3 dimensions, using the walls and ceiling as much as the floor. When holographic opponents tried to surround her, she went up and over them. When they adapted to her aerial approach, she dropped down and attacked from below. She ended her session by improvising a weapon from 2 pieces of training equipment and using it to disable all remaining opponents simultaneously. That fighting style does not exist, Keth 7 stated flatly. Our database contains every known combat method in the galaxy. What you just demonstrated is impossible. I fly ships. Lisa explained. I just flew myself instead. Dan approached combat like an engineering problem. He analyzed the holographic opponents for weaknesses, found flaws in their programming, and exploited them ruthlessly. When the simulation tried to adapt, Dan adapted faster. He turned their own weapons against them, used the environment to create traps, and eventually hacked the holographic projectors themselves to make his opponents attack each other. This is cheating, the tree instructor protested. You cannot reprogram the combat simulation during the test. You said I should neutralize the threats, Dan replied calmly. I did that. Amy's session broke the simulation entirely. When the holographic opponents attacked her, she did something none of the aliens had ever seen before. She talked to them. Amy tried to negotiate, to find out why they were fighting, to see if there was a peaceful solution. When talking failed, and the holograms continued their programmed attacks, Amy shifted into what she called medical emergency mode. She treated the combat like performing surgery while under fire. Amy moved with precise efficiency, targeting specific points on her opponents that would disable them without causing permanent damage. She ended every exchange by checking to make sure her holographic enemies were not seriously hurt, even though they were not real. She is attempting to provide medical aid to opponents during combat, the tree instructor reported in a voice filled with electronic confusion. This behavior does not compute. When all 4 humans had completed their combat assessments, the alien instructors huddled in emergency consultation. Their discussion involved a lot of high-pitched sounds and rapid color changes that looked like argument. Finally, Keth 7 approached the humans. Your combat performance raises serious concerns about your species' integration into galactic society. You do not follow established protocols. You improvise responses that cannot be predicted or controlled. You adapt to changing conditions in real time rather than relying on proven methods. And this is bad because, Jake asked, because unpredictable. Behavior leads to chaos, Keth 7 replied. Galactic civilization depends on every species behaving according to known parameters. If we cannot predict how you will respond to threats, how can we trust you with access to advanced technology and weapons? Lisa stepped forward. Maybe the real question is how you have survived this long with combat methods that any enemy could predict and counter. The silence that followed was profound. Jake realized that Lisa had just suggested something that probably had never occurred to any of these aliens. They had built their entire society around predictability and control. But what happened when they faced an enemy that did not follow their rules? We will need to conduct additional evaluations, Keth 7 finally announced. Your species presents challenges that our assessment protocols are not designed to handle. As they were escorted back to their quarters, Jake caught Dan grinning. What is so funny? He whispered. I just figured out why they are so scared of us, Dan replied quietly. They have never met anyone who could think outside the box. To them, we are not just unpredictable, we are impossible. Jake thought about that as the alien guards sealed them back into their transparent prison. Maybe being impossible was not such a bad thing after all. Keth 7 had not slept in 4 days, though sleep for a crystalline being was different from human rest. Instead of lying down, Keth 7 stood motionless and let the energy patterns in its body slow to minimum levels. But each time it tried to enter this resting state, thoughts about the humans pulled its consciousness back to full activity. The chief assessment officer had successfully integrated 217 species into galactic society over the past 8 centuries. Each integration followed the same basic pattern. New species arrived with their own cultural behaviors and response patterns. The assessment identified these patterns. The integration process gradually modified the most problematic behaviors until the species could function within galactic norms. It was a system that had never failed until now. The humans defied every basic principle of sapient behavior. They made decisions without consulting established protocols. They adapted to new situations without reference to their cultural programming. Most disturbing of all, they seemed capable of learning and changing their responses in real time based on immediate circumstances. This should not be possible. Every sapient species in the galaxy operated according to predictable patterns learned through culture, training, and genetic predisposition. Individual members might vary slightly in their responses, but the basic patterns remained constant. It was these patterns that made galactic civilization possible. Keth 7 made a decision that violated its own protocols. Instead of following standard assessment procedures, it would observe the humans in their natural state when they thought they were not being tested. Hidden monitoring systems activated throughout the human quarters. Microscopic sensors tracked every movement, every word, every gesture. If the humans were hiding some form of advanced conditioning or training, the constant observation would reveal it. What Keth 7 discovered made no sense at all. During their first meal under observation, Amy automatically reached across the table to steady Dan's drinking container before it could tip over. She did this while looking at Lisa and talking about something completely unrelated. The container had only been wobbling slightly. Any other species would have waited to see if it actually fell before responding. Amy somehow predicted a problem that had not yet fully developed. How did you know that was going to fall? Keth 7 asked, speaking through the room's communication system. Amy looked surprised by the question. It was off balance. I could see it starting to lean. But when Keth 7 reviewed the sensor data, the container had only been tilting at an angle of 1.3 degrees. No other species in galactic records could detect instability at such minor levels, much less respond to it preemptively. The observations continued. Jake shifted his chair to give Lisa more room before she finished turning around to reach for something. Don adjusted the room's lighting controls when Amy squinted slightly, even though she had not asked for any changes. Lisa moved her food tray a few inches to the left, just before Dan set down his elbow in that exact spot. These micro-responses happened constantly. The humans anticipated each other's needs, predicted minor problems before they developed, and solved issues that had not yet been formally identified. Each individual action was small, but the cumulative effect suggested a form of awareness that bordered on precognition. Keth 7 decided to interview each human privately to understand this phenomenon. Jake was first. When asked about his rapid responses during the assessments, he struggled to provide explanations that made sense to Keth 7. I saw what needed to be done, so I did it, Jake said when asked about deviating from emergency protocols. The blue lights were leading people on a path that would take too long. People were getting hurt while following the safe route. So I went the fast way and helped who I could. But how did you know the fast way would be safe? Keth 7 pressed. You had no data about the structural integrity of that route. You had no information about the probability of additional debris falling. You made a decision with insufficient information. Jake was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to find words for something he had never needed to explain before. I could see the supports were solid. The debris pattern showed where things were likely to fall next. It felt right. It felt right, Keth 7 repeated slowly. You made a tactical decision based on feeling rather than analysis. Analysis takes too long when people are in danger, Jake replied. Sometimes you have to trust your gut and move. The concept of trusting one's gut made no sense to Keth 7. Digestive organs did not provide tactical information. Yet Jake's gut feelings had led to superior outcomes in every test scenario. Lisa's interview was equally confusing. When asked about her combat performance, she described her thinking process in terms that had no equivalent in galactic languages. I just flow with what happens, Lisa explained. You see what the enemy is doing, you feel what they are going to do next, and you move to where they cannot reach you. It is like flying through an asteroid field. You do not calculate the trajectory of every rock. You sense the pattern and find the path through. But this sensing you describe, Keth 7 said, how does it function? What data sources does it use? Lisa frowned, clearly struggling with the question. Everything, I guess. The way they move, the way they shift their weight, the look in their eyes. You take it all in at once and just know. Keth 7 had Lisa repeat this explanation 3 times, but it never became more comprehensible. The idea of processing multiple data streams simultaneously without conscious analysis violated everything known about information processing in sapient minds. Dan's interview introduced an entirely new problem. When asked about his problem-solving methods, Dan described what he called thinking around corners. You look at what you are trying to accomplish, and you think about all the ways it could work, Dan explained. Most of those ways will not be practical, but some of them will give you ideas about other approaches you had not considered. Eventually, you find something that works. But how do you evaluate approaches that do not exist in your database of known solutions? Keth 7 asked. I make them up, Dan said, as if this was obvious. If the old ways do not work for a new problem, you have to invent new ways. The concept of inventing new solutions was so alien to Keth 7 that it had to pause the interview to process the implications. Every other species solved problems by consulting their accumulated knowledge and choosing the best available option. The idea of creating entirely new options had never occurred to any galactic civilization. Amy's interview was the most disturbing of all. When asked about her behavior during the combat assessment, she explained her thinking in terms that challenged Keth 7's understanding of conflict itself. Fighting should be the last option, not the first one, Amy said. Before you hurt someone, you should try to understand why the conflict exists and whether there is a better solution. But the combat assessment tests your ability to neutralize threats, Keth 7 pointed out. The opponents were programmed to attack. There was no possibility of negotiation. There is always a possibility of negotiation until someone is actually trying to kill you, Amy replied firmly. And even then, you should use only the minimum force necessary to stop the threat. Unnecessary violence is just cruelty. This philosophy was completely incompatible with galactic understanding of conflict resolution. Every other species approached combat as a matter of applying predetermined responses to classified threat types. The idea of seeking alternatives to violence during active conflict had never been successfully implemented by any civilization. After completing all 4 interviews, Keth 7 faced a disturbing conclusion. The humans were not hiding advanced training or secret conditioning. Their unprecedented responses came from something far more fundamental than learned behavior. They were thinking, not thinking in the sense of consulting databases and following logical decision trees, which all sapient species could do. The humans were generating new thoughts in real time, creating novel solutions to immediate problems, and adapting their responses based on continuously updated assessment of changing conditions. This should not be possible. Consciousness was supposed to be a process of running sophisticated programs, not of writing new ones on the fly. Yet the humans seemed to be doing exactly that all the time, without even realizing how extraordinary it was. Keth-7 prepared to submit its preliminary findings to the Galactic Council. The humans represented either the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat in galactic history. They could solve problems that no other species could address, but their unpredictability made them impossible to control or direct safely. As Keth-7 began composing its report, alarms started sounding throughout the station. This was not a drill or a test. Something was very wrong, and all of Keth-7's careful analysis was about to become irrelevant compared to the question of whether these impossible humans could help save everyone aboard Nexus 7. The alarms woke Jake from the first real sleep he had gotten since arriving at Nexus 7. The sound was different from the testing alarms they had heard before. This was deeper, more urgent, and it made his teeth ache. Emergency lights bathed there, quarters in pulsing red that hurt his eyes. Lisa was already up and checking the door controls. "We are locked in," she reported, "but I can hear panic in the corridors outside." Dan was examining the wall panels with his tools. The station's power grid is fluctuating badly. Something is putting massive strain on the energy systems. Amy had her medical scanner out and was frowning at the readings. "I am detecting dangerous radiation levels outside our quarters. This is not a drill." Jake felt that familiar tightness in his stomach that came before action. "We need to get out there and help." "Help with what?" Lisa asked. "We do not even know what the emergency is." Before Jake could answer, the transparent wall of their quarters flickered and Keth-7 materialized on the other side. The alien's crystal body was flashing rapid sequences of color that hurt to look at directly. "Solar storm," Keth-7 announced. Without preamble. "Class 7 stellar eruption from the local star. Radiation levels will be lethal within 4 hours. Station shields are failing." "What is the evacuation procedure?" Amy asked immediately. "There is no evacuation procedure," Keth-7 replied. "Nexus 7 cannot be evacuated. There are over 50,000 beings aboard this station. We have transport capacity for fewer than 3,000. Standard protocol is to shelter in protected sections and wait for the storm to pass." "How long will that take?" Don asked. 18 hours minimum, possibly 36 hours. Jake looked at his team and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. "The shields will not hold that long." "No," Keth-7 admitted. "They will not. We estimate complete shield failure in 6 hours. After that, radiation exposure will begin killing everyone aboard the station. So what are you doing about it?" Lisa demanded. KET-7's color patterns shifted to something that looked like resignation. "All available technical personnel are attempting to reinforce the shield generators. All available medical personnel are preparing radiation treatment facilities. All available security personnel are maintaining order during the crisis. Standard emergency protocols are being followed, and it is not working," Dan said. It was not a question. "No," Keth-7 confirmed. "It is not working." Jake made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. "Let us out. We can help." "You lack authorization to operate station systems," Keth-7 protested. "You have no training in our technologies. You do not understand our emergency procedures." "Your emergency procedures are not working," Amy pointed out. "Maybe it is time to try something different." For a long moment, Keth-7 stood motionless. Jake could see the alien struggling with concepts that went against everything in its programming. Finally, the lock on their quarters disengaged. This violates every protocol in galactic emergency management, Cath-7 said as the humans rushed past it into the corridor. I will be held responsible for whatever chaos you cause. Then you better come with us to make sure we do not break anything important. Jake called back as they ran toward the nearest transport tube. The corridors of Nexus 7 were filled with controlled panic. Alien beings moved in orderly lines toward designated shelter areas. Technical crews floated past carrying equipment Jake did not recognize. Medical teams pushed floating stretchers loaded with radiation exposure victims. But what struck Jake most was how separate everyone seemed. The Graxons helped only other Graxons. The Velathi stayed with their own kind. Each species followed its own protocols without coordinating with the others. It was like watching 12 different emergency responses happening simultaneously in the same space. This is insane, Lisa muttered as they squeezed into a transport tube already packed with fleeing aliens. They are not working together at all. Each species has its own emergency protocols, Cath-7 explained, somehow managing to fit its crystalline form into the crowded tube. Coordination between species requires formal authorization through the Galactic Emergency Council. How long does that take? Dan asked. The Emergency Council typically convenes within 72 hours of a formal request. Amy stared at Cath-7. You are going to die waiting for permission to save yourselves. The transport tube delivered them to the station's central command center. The scene there was barely controlled chaos. Dozens of different alien species worked at control stations, but each group was focused on its own specific systems. No one seemed to be looking at the big picture. Jake found the station commander, a tall being that looked like a walking piece of coral covered in blinking lights. What is the current situation? He asked. Shield generators are operating at 43% efficiency and declining. The commander reported in a voice like grinding stone. Primary power couplings are overloading due to increased energy demand. Secondary systems are coming online, but cannot compensate for primary system failures. How many people are working on the shield generators? Lisa asked. All available Graxon technicians are assigned to generator maintenance. All available Velathi engineers are assigned to power coupling repairs. All available Altarian specialists are assigned to secondary system activation. But they are not working together, Dan observed. Each group is solving part of the problem independently. Coordination protocols require formal authorization, the commander replied. Emergency Council approval is pending. Jake felt something snap inside him. People are going to die while you wait for permission to cooperate. Without asking for authorization, Jake walked to the central control station and started examining the displays. The information was presented in alien symbols, but the patterns were clear enough. Power flowing to the shields was unstable because 3 different teams were making adjustments without talking to each other. Lisa, can you interface with their navigation systems? Jake called out. Already on it, Lisa replied, pulling out her portable computer and connecting it to a nearby panel. Their traffic control protocols are actually pretty similar to Earth space traffic management. Dan, we need you to look at their power distribution grid, Amy said while pulling up medical data on radiation exposure throughout the station. The energy flow patterns are completely inefficient. I see the problem, Dan announced after studying the engineering displays for 30 seconds. They have 3 separate power grids that do not talk to each other. Each one is trying to compensate for failures in the others, but they are working against each other instead of together. Around them, alien technicians stopped their individual tasks and stared. The humans were operating station systems without authorization, violating protocols that had never been broken in galactic history. This is not permitted, the Coral commander protested. Each species must work within its designated responsibilities. Then everyone dies, Jake said flatly. Your choice. For the next 4 hours, the humans did what they did best. They ignored established procedures and solved problems through creative cooperation. Jake coordinated between the different alien technical teams, getting them to share information and work together for the first time in galactic history. When the Graxan engineers discovered a critical failure in Generator 17, Jake immediately connected them with Valathi power specialists who could reroute energy from Generator 20-3. Lisa took control of the station's traffic management systems and began evacuating non-essential personnel from the most dangerous sections. She coordinated with alien pilots to improve evacuation efficiency and worked with life support teams to manage atmospheric pressure in critical areas. Dan dove into the power distribution problem with the enthusiasm of someone solving the puzzle of his lifetime. He connected the 3 separate power grids into a single unified system, balancing loads across the entire station and eliminating the energy conflicts that had been making the shield failures worse. Amy established the first multi-species medical response team in galactic history. She got Graxan medics working with Valathi healers and Altarian regeneration specialists. When radiation exposure cases started arriving, her integrated medical teams could provide treatments that no single species could manage alone. The solar storm reached its peak 6 hours after the alarms first sounded. By then, the station's shields were holding at 78% efficiency. The power grid was stable and running cooler than it had in years. Evacuation of critical areas was complete, and medical teams were treating radiation exposure with unprecedented success rates. When the storm finally passed 12 hours later, Nexus 7 had suffered 0 casualties. Not one being aboard the station had died or suffered permanent injury. It was the most successful emergency response in galactic history. In the aftermath, Keth 7 found Jake in the command center, still coordinating repair efforts with mixed alien teams. I have to submit my final report to the Galactic Council, Keth 7 said quietly. What should I tell them about humans? Jake looked around at the command center, where aliens from 12 different species were still working together, sharing information and coordinating repairs in ways that had never happened before. Tell them we think for ourselves, Jake said. Tell them we do not wait for permission to do the right thing. Tell them we see problems and solve them in